Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti, welcome to Trieste. Iniziamo oggi questa intensa giornata di lavoro e come in tutte le giornate di lavoro è doveroso da parte mia far portare a tutti i presenti il saluto delle autorità che ringrazio perché non fanno mai mancare il sostegno a questa disciplina che immodestamente oggi sono qui a rappresentare. Chiamo pertanto a portare i saluti del padrone di casa, il direttore generale, il dottor Antonio Poggiana, che porta i saluti dell'azienda sanitaria universitaria Giuliano Isontina.
Grazie professor D'Errico, padrone di casa, pensavo fosse il professor Murena, visto che siamo in un'aula universitaria. Benvenuti a tutti, benvenuti a Trieste, benvenuti in questa giornata ricorrente ormai annualmente, perché da un po' di anni abbiamo attivato, grazie a un finanziamento regionale, questo registro sulle morti cardiache improvvise, quindi una raccolta di informazioni e di dati clinici che consentono poi di sviluppare e analizzarli. Mettendo insieme professionisti, questo il professor D'Errico è, diciamo, il riferimento di questo progetto. Vi porto anche i saluti dall'assessore, l'assessore Riccardi, che doveva essere presente questa mattina, ma che purtroppo, siccome è anche assessore alla protezione civile, negli ultimi giorni, soprattutto ieri sera, c'è stato qualche problema meteorologico. Ho visto che la giornata è intensa, con argomenti e con la partecipazione di studiosi di altri paesi, dei paesi a noi vicini, dei paesi amici, e questo per noi è motivo di grande pregio, perché consente di confrontarci su questi temi anche con esperienze di altre nazioni. Non mi resta che augurarvi buon lavoro, visto che la giornata sarà molto impegnativa e intensa, e quindi buon lavoro a tutti e buona giornata. Grazie.
Grazie, ringrazio il direttore generale. Allora cedo la parola al secondo padrone di casa, al direttore del Dipartimento di Scienze Mediche, Chirurgiche e della Salute, il professor Luigi Murena. E grazie Luigi di essere qui.
Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti a Trieste. Siamo onorati di ospitarvi qui per questo congresso sulla morte cardiaca improvvisa e sono estremamente contento di aver visto il programma che è ispirato alla multidisciplinarità e soprattutto con un coinvolgimento di esperti, ricercatori a livello internazionale, e sono sicuro che con un panel così la vostra discussione procederà in modo favorevole e proficuo nel identificare quali possano essere le migliori strategie di prevenzione di questi eventi, che sono ovviamente terribili. Io spero che abbiate la possibilità così, ma sono sicuro che lo farete, di condividere conoscenze, di scambiarvi idee, anche di creare delle partnership o di consolidare amicizie già in corso. E spero anche che abbiate la possibilità di godervi un po' Trieste, che io trovo che sia una città bellissima, lo dico da non triestino, e spero abbiate anche la possibilità quindi di godervi un attimo la città. Non voglio sottrarre altro tempo ai lavori, vi ringrazio per il vostro impegno, per essere tutti qui presenti, ancora benvenuti e buona giornata e buon lavoro.
Ultimo, ma non ultimo, saluto al nostro presidente dell'Ordine dei Medici della provincia di Trieste, all'amico Cosimo Quaranta, che sempre tanto spazio, e ti ringrazio di questo, dedica alla medicina legale.
Ovviamente ringrazio per l'invito e lo faccio con piacere perché ricordo benissimo che poco meno di 4 anni fa il professor D'Errico, venendo a presentarsi all'ordine come si usava e qualcuno ancora usa, in quanto come ne ho scritto, mi aveva parlato di questo progetto del registro riguardante le morti improvvise. Confesso che francamente non avevo le idee chiare, me le sono chiarite in questi 4 anni, dove ci sono già stati 2 incontri, correggimi se sbaglio, ma questo si caratterizza per una parolina chiave che è l'internazionalità. Questo a controprova del fatto che da una parte l'impegno, dall'altra parte l'importanza dell'argomento di cui si tratta, perché ricordo che ai primi incontri era molto sollecitato l'aspetto emotivo della morte improvvisa, che era forse più corretto definirla inattesa. Invece devo dire che nel corso di questi anni il taglio si è sempre più orientato sull'aspetto scientifico, ma non sterile, non di pura osservazione, ma di prevenzione, attingendo a altre discipline, oltre alla cardiologia, che era partner naturale della tematica. Quindi mi complimento col professor D'Errico, mi complimento con tutti quelli che hanno permesso questo incontro e non posso che fare l'augurio che questo che io ho visto in seme sta diventando un albero che si sta estendendo oltre i confini e, come spesso succede nella medicina, la parola chiave resta solo una: insieme. E quindi auguro di proseguire su questa strada in maniera da allargare la platea e avere una casistica e dei dati che permettano alla fin fine di migliorare lo stato di salute dei nostri non assistiti, dei cittadini, delle persone. Ecco. Grazie ancora e buon lavoro a tutti.
A few words to introduce this meeting. Welcome to Trieste from me and Professor Gianfranco Sinagra. He can't be here today because of his engagement as a president of Italian Association of Cardiology. And Professor Sinagra asked to me to wish a good meeting. When Professor Sinagra and me thought to create the regional register of sudden cardiac death, we know that it would have been heavy to manage. But what we didn't know was that it would have been so stimulating and satisfying from many different points of view. Opportunities of research, of collaboration, and of study. The Regional Register of Sudden Cardiac Death of Friuli, Venezia, Giulia is now 4-year-old. It's not adult, but he's able to walk. And now he's able to go abroad, out of the frontiers of our region, and reach the Balkan countries. We are proud today to see the whole Aula Magna full of people and to have 20 poster presentation from young researchers of all over the Europe. The poster will be rewarded. The 3 best poster will take the Best Poster Award, and immediately after the lunch, we go to get the award to the best 3 poster. I wish all a good conference, and I hope you can accept my invitation for collaboration and to try to create an international Balkan register of sudden cardiac death. Thanks for coming. Thanks to all the speakers, and thanks to all of you. I don't want to stall you much time, so I asked to Professor Yanko Kolev to introduce the meeting. And Professor Yanko Kolev is the president of the International Association of Forensic Sciences. The society give his partnership, so thank you, Yanko.
Dear Professor D'Errico, dear esteemed colleagues from all over Europe, and especially from Balkan area here, it's my pleasure and honor to be here, and I'd like to extend my greetings not only on behalf of International Association of Forensic Sciences, but also from the Balkan Academy of Forensic Sciences, in which I'm part of, and from the Bulgarian Society of Forensic Medicine. So we are a very broad community, but also very close friends and colleagues from this region, Balkan area and countries around Balkan area. The problem with sudden cardiac death is always present throughout our practice. And for me, it's already like 26 years, and this is one of the biggest problems in our practice and in diagnostic activities. And it is not only a forensic medical problem, it's a problem for the primary medical care. It's a big problem for the society because, yes, sometimes it's very easy to diagnose a homicide, but not too easy to diagnose a sudden cardiac death and what is behind this condition. So we really need help from a multidisciplinary team, not only forensic pathologists, but clinical pathologists, geneticists, from cardiologists, and other specialties which are involved with this social problem. I think that this is a really valuable beginning of future collaboration for our countries and for our area. So I'm really happy that this start is here in this beautiful place and with such a beautiful organization. And I'm sure, and I put my efforts in it to proceed next years, and I really suppose decades, but it's better to be only years and to solve this problem maybe. And then we will have the possibility to work together and to make a common register, to make a multidisciplinary approach from different countries. Some of them are not well organized in this diagnostic area. But nowadays it's possible to collaborate on an international level, so this is the best option for every one of us, and to develop algorithms for such health problem. So it's really my pleasure, and I'm happy to be here, and I wish success to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanko. So let's start. I'm very proud to introduce Professor Mary Sheppard. Professor Mary Sheppard doesn't need presentation. All of you know Professor Sheppard. She's maybe the most famous cardiopathologist in the world. And she was here last year. And when we left Professor Sheppard, I said, see you, I hope to see you again. And you answered to me, I remember very well, Trieste is now on the road of sudden cardiac death. And I make you a promise to do my best to improve our activity. And so I do, and I spend all my effort for this activity. So please, Professor Mary Sheppard, we are very happy to host you here again.
I am Stefano, I'm honored to be here again. And I think what it highlights is that the sudden cardiac death is becoming international. I've just been at a meeting in Costa Rica where Joachim Lucina from Seville has been coordinating the investigation of sudden death in South America as well as in Spain. So really, you're leading here. I mean, with Padua in the past, I mean, Italy is famous for its work in the history of medicine and the role of the autopsy, as you said, here in Trieste as well. And really, I think what's important is now we're all aware, and particularly what I'm impressed with here is the amount of forensic pathologists. When I'm in the UK, we won't get that amount of forensic pathologists together in the country all in one place. So I'm very impressed with your ability to get from all over the Balkans and delighted to have met you all as well. So now, with sudden death, I'm really preaching to the converted here. You all have an interest, you all have a positive attitude. So where are we now in the year 2024? Really? How do I return? Yeah. Well, as we just mentioned, this is with Thomas Ling, who is the Danish. The Danish are very impressive with their information, and both in the healthy and in the dead as well. They've detailed autopsies and detailed medical causes of death. So it's how do we write about the role of the autopsy? Because to many people, why do we need an autopsy? We've got wonderful imaging, you know, we've wonderful medical information on everybody. So why should we need an autopsy? And we think it's vital for cases to increase survival in the family members left behind. But here you can see on the right, the annual autopsy rate throughout the world. There's been a massive reduction in autopsies being asked for. For instance, in my country, hospital autopsies just don't exist anymore. They're not done within hospitals. They are all done under the coronial system. So yes, and as a result, pathologists are being de-skilled. They're not able to do autopsies or do them properly to the level that we would expect when we're investigating sudden cardiac death. Now, what about the terminology? Well, you've lots of terminology, haven't you? And it can be quite difficult. And each series, if you look at autopsy series, you can see that they have different parameters, what they define as sudden death. Well, we know a sudden cessation of in other words, your heart stops. So this is sudden, unexpected, or unexplained death. And it's a natural death. Now, this is where a problem arises because our coroners in England, and some of them even today, will say it's natural, I don't need to investigate it further. And it's presumed cardiac cause. And then we've sudden cardiac death, SCD, where you have found in a person greater than 1 year, because we separate them from sudden infant deaths, in which a previous medical history doesn't give a cause. It's inadequate, the medical history. And then sudden arrhythmic death, or SADS as we call it, is unexplained, occurring in a person greater than 1 year with negative pathological and toxicological investigation. This is the vital, the negative pathology and the negative toxicology. You know it's sudden infant death in children under a year. And then we also have, and there's a big interest now in sudden unexpected death in childhood between the age of 1 and 18 years. So all these are the terminology which I think you've got to be very careful when you look at studies as to what they mean in each category. Because really the autopsy is vital to eliminate non-cardiac causes. And here are 3 series from combined in our paper, and the cardiac death made up 66%, but the non-cardiac made up 34%, nearly 1/3. So you eliminate other neurological, pulmonary, and particularly also toxicology as well, toxic causes. So the autopsy, even in a case where there's no idea that what the cause is, there's no previous history to indicate a neurological cause, pulmonary, very important to eliminate. So that's the first role of the pathologist, eliminate the non-cardiac causes, which can be significant in the general population. And here is from Denmark, where they have very, very good detailed medical causes of death, in which of their deaths in a particular period, 11% were sudden, nearly 12%. But look, only 61% had an autopsy. 1/3 did not, and this is in a Western, well-developed, well-funded forensic service, right? Of those, 72% were sudden cardiac. They found a cardiac cause, but they found 28% non-cardiac. And they found that the autopsy rate declined with the age of the patient. They thought, well, it's an older patient, we don't need an autopsy. And in several European countries, which our European Association has published on with Banner, the autopsy rate is only 40% in sudden unexpected death of people less than 50 years of age. So we've a room for improvement, I think, throughout what we call the developed world for the autopsy. And as I said, this is from the guidelines. Autopsy, they say, is recommended. Well, in my idea, an autopsy is almost essential when you've got a sudden unexpected death. But yet we have a declining rate and less skilled, you could say, autopsy practice with pathologists. So you need specific training, I think, in autopsy practice. And in the UK, we have a particular certificate which is issued to pathologists for autopsy practice. So you identify the cause of death naturally, you eliminate non-cardiac causes, you take your sample for toxicology, and you'd retain the cardiac and genetic samples when you suspect there's a possible inherited cardiac condition. And then obviously go on to the family follow-up. So you really need training and skills in the cardiac examination when you have a sudden unexpected death, since the majority are cardiac. And if you're on this thing, there should be a specialist cardiac as a second opinion. And I think you should always have a second opinion, particularly when you're diagnosing a cardiomyopathy, a possible inherited cardiomyopathy. Like they have second opinions for actual cancer diagnosis, oncology. I think you should have a second opinion for cardiomyopathies. So the autopsy, as I commented in Heart Rhythm, is still valuable. And here, what you are doing is developing a national registry, that each country should have a national registry promoting the autopsy after a sudden, unexpected death. So a full autopsy, imaging is being used increasingly, and people say, well, you can use imaging, particularly for subarachnoid hemorrhages, for trauma, for ruptured abdominal aneurysms, dissecting aneurysms. They will be useful, but the majority of deaths are within the heart itself. And toxicology. But as we said, causes of death, particularly if you look at studies in the USA, are based on death certification. And death certification is known, even in this century, to be inaccurate in up to 10% of cases. And even a recent football association, right, soccer players show that only 127 of 617 from 67 countries underwent autopsy, only 20%. These are young, fit footballers who have had no previous medical history. So how a cause of death could be supplied without an autopsy, I have no idea. So the central role of the autopsy, to me, really you should include all age groups. You may argue about it. Do you have them under 40 years of age? Do you have them under 50? Do you have them under 35? Well, in our practice, we accept all ages, up to my oldest is 101. And you may argue about the fact of ischemic heart disease, blah, blah, etc. But really, we find sudden adult death with a morphologically normal heart as common in the over 35s as we do in the under 35s, but it's more prominent in the under 35s. So you need to verify the specific cardiac cause. So it can only be made, the diagnosis. You cannot diagnose a cardiomyopathy on imaging. If the heart is dilated, a bit thickened, well, what is that? It means nothing on imaging. You can't diagnose a myocardial infarct, in my opinion, on imaging. Somebody may argue with that because there is a discussion about imaging. So in the 21st century, there is still a role for the autopsy. Right. And as this is work that we've done with you, Stefano, and with Davide, I think it shows a collaboration that we do between institutions, between registries. And it's sudden with morphologically normal heart. Davide examined our database and found that, yes, in 15%, right, there was positive toxicology. In other words, the role of toxicology is essential, and either single positivity or multiple positivity. And this is what's important, and it's a history of drug abuse was in 66% of them, but 34% did not have a history of drug use. So you do it, even if it's a reverend mother, if it's a grandfather, you still will do toxicology. So very important to emphasize that. So here's the postmortem. So eliminate your non-cardiac, and the big role of the pathologist is then to say, is it morphologically normal? Is it SADS? Or is there a cardiac abnormality? Is there a cardiomyopathy, particularly a genetic cardiomyopathy? Is it anomalous coronary artery? Is it myocarditis? That's our role, divided into two basic areas. And I suppose we're lucky in the United Kingdom. We've over 500,000 deaths per year, and all sudden deaths have to be reported to the coroner. The coroner is the local medical examiner. In our country, he's a legal, he's not medical, he is a legal person who's appointed by the local government, and he has coroner's officers who are there on either side of him who actually liaise with the family and establish the circumstances and the background to the death itself. We have 76 coroners, and his role is to determine when, where, and how a person died. And a local pathologist in his region will do the autopsy with toxicology. And the good news is that we do over 100,000 autopsies per year in the United Kingdom. So we have an extremely high rate. You can see there on your left, in dark blue is the number of deaths, and light blue is the number referred to the coroner. Over half of all deaths are referred to our coroner. And our autopsy rate has maintained between 36 to 43% of the cases reported to him or her. So we have a high level of autopsies, and it hasn't really gone down in the last decade. And even it has increased in the last, you could say, from about 2023 as well. So we have, in other words, the coroners are more ordering autopsies. The big issue is who pays for them, because each coroner has a limited budget. We also have issued guidelines for all pathologists in the for everywhere. All pathologists, are trained in autopsy technique. They have to pass a special exam under the Royal College of Pathologists. And number two, we issue guidelines in autopsy practice and sudden death with light cardiac pathology. And this I wrote originally in 2015 with Kim Suvarna, who is a pathologist from the north. We're from the south of the United Kingdom. And we've updated these guidelines in 2022. And the major bottom line was you've got to retain tissue. You've got to retain cardiac tissue in all these autopsies and take genetic material. So in other words, our pathologists do not have any excuse not to retain the tissue. And what are the criteria we use when you're doing an autopsy? Well, when you have a negative autopsy, when you find nothing. Heart looks normal, everything is normal, toxicology is taken and negative. So you're thinking of the morphologically normal heart. So is it sudden arrhythmic or sudden adult death, SADS, true SADS? When you have unequivocal or equivocal findings like a bit of atheroma, well, how much atheroma? And we could argue all day about how much atheroma in the coronary arteries is significant in cardiac death. And this is a big issue. I think there's an overdiagnosis of ischemic heart disease. What about mild aortic stenosis, a little bit of calcification? What about mild mitral valve prolapse? So all these are areas that pathologists have no criteria on. What if you have a dilated, thin-walled, hypertrophied, scarred or fatty-looking heart with normal or unobstructed coronary arteries? And if you see a case and think, oh, I think this is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, I think this is dilated, I think this is arrhythmogenic if it's fatty looking. If there's unexplained cardiac hypertrophy, and if there's unexplained scarring, you see a scar in the heart, yet the coronary arteries are normal. I also include severe mitral valve prolapse, particularly in younger people under the age of 40, particularly in females, because that is a genetic disease in the younger age group. We also include aortic aneurysms. We tell pathologists they can make the diagnosis, but please refer them, because if they're under the age of 40, it's almost certainly genetic, and the family will need screening. And we also look at very weird and unusual, particularly in the pediatric age group, the idiopathic calcification of infancy, which is genetic, and also metabolic and storage cardiomyopathies. So these are our criteria, which I tell pathologists to look for. And so we have one specialist cardiac referral centre, which is based at St. George's Hospital, at my hospital in London. Right? And this unit was opened in 2006, supported, I'm glad to say, by our chief coroner. This is the boss of all the coroners. We have a chief coroner appointed who is a judge, a very experienced judge. And in addition, it was the bottom line, and you can see there, it was funded by a family charity because families were getting a poor result from general pathology. They felt that they needed somebody who could devote expertise or develop it in looking at the card. But they got so bad reports back, or they weren't followed up, or they didn't know, or it was utterly inadequate. So this was funded by the family charities. And what we do is we receive a heart by courier. It's sent to us by courier from throughout the United Kingdom. The heart is fixed already in formalin, drained of formalin, and sent particularly. We give instructions. It arrives to our department. It is looked at, processed, and tissue histology done. And we generally hope to give a report within 2 weeks of receiving the heart. What's also important is we've developed a database in which we enter all the actual details about each individual case. And the bottom line now, a piece of spleen. We take spleen for genetic analysis. We don't ask for blood, we ask for spleen. We find it very good. It's very easy to take at autopsy. It's not contaminated by anything. We put it into RNA later, a reagent that preserves the DNA at room temperature until it reaches our department, where it's then sent to genetics for freezing. So in other words, in the mortuary, the pathologist or the mortician hasn't to worry about liquid nitrogen or freezing it. They just simply haven't the facilities. This works very well, and the quality of the DNA is excellent. That's been extracted in this. So we get blocks and slides as well as whole hearts, because some pathologists say, I will do the examination and I will send you the slides for a second opinion. We generally take 7 to 10 blocks of tissue from right and left ventricle. Sometimes we'll take the conduction tissue, but generally not. And I'm looking forward to hearing the lecture on the conduction tissue later on. So there's the package that arrives to us, and we end up with the histology. And we have 4 members of staff who actually process and look at and identify each case. And we get cases from throughout the United Kingdom. And the coroners and coroners officers are now well aware of what we do. And particularly we train the coroners officers. Once a year we have a meeting with them where we talk about consent, getting consent for the family to retain the tissue and the genetic material for research. And we get consent now in 50% of cases, once the families are brought on board and realise the significance of the sudden death. I won't bore you with the details of the actual documentation, but it's very detailed. We have to identify, we have to verify. We have a Human Tissue Act in the United Kingdom where we have to actually follow the tissue through and identify it and make sure that the family's wishes are carried out depending on what the family wishes are. So we have a lot of bureaucracy. These are the instructions we give to the pathologist and the mortuary as to how they fix the heart and how they send the piece of spleen. We find no problem with this method. We get the heart reliably fixed, we get the genetic material. So once coroners and in the area are aware of what this is, the pathologists are aware and the morticians. So it's training and communication with those groups is so vitally important to get the right scenario. And here's our database, which I'm sure, Davide, you're well familiar with because Davide was with us for 6 months last year. And what it is we get the history. We get the age, the sex, the body weight, family history, previous if we can, but there's generally no clinical information in the majority of our cases. We then weigh the heart, we do particular measurements, and we do the microscopy, we take photographs. We do the histology. In all cases, we take histology. Every case has to have histology. And finally, once we've looked at the histology, we will then issue a cause of death to the pathologist and to the coroner. And this reflects our practice. I put that green line because that's from 2013 when we really moved to St. George's Hospital. So from 0 referrals, or very few, when I began in 1995 with Mike Davis. Our numbers referred to us have gone up from 100 hearts to 200 hearts, and once we moved to George's up to 600 hearts. And even this year alone, we've got over 770 hearts. In other words, we get about 20 hearts per week. So a huge, big referral. So in other words, pathologists are referring, and the light blue histogram there is genetic material. From 13, the pathologist started practicing what we call the molecular autopsy, taking the genetic material, and now you can see the amount of spleens we get has come up to almost half of the cases. We have spleen to match the heart. So the era of the molecular autopsy is now well established. So the molecular autopsy. This is the concept. If a potentially inheritable, if you think as a pathologist there is possibly normal heart or a cardiomyopathy or an aortic dissection in a young person under the age of 40, you either take fresh blood or a 2 centimetre cube of fresh spleen. Should be reserved for the future genetic testing. Once you've made a phenotype, then the genetic testing is done in our genetic hubs. And the consent is done by the coroner's officers with the family, not the pathologist, not the mortician, it's the coroner's officer because they have direct contact with the family. And the families are informed by the coroner that this is happening. If the heart is sent to me, the coroner is informed of this, right? And the samples that are taken for medical, legal and consented. And the sample is frozen once it reaches our department. So we look at a whole heart. This is it. And we also, you can see there on the lower right, the vials in which the spleen comes with the heart. And there's the packaging. So as I say, We've come from specialist referral centre with increasing numbers onto the era of the molecular autopsy with fresh spleen for genetic testing. And really, from the original work that was done by Mike Davis, my mentor, in the 90s in the UK, he was the first pathologist to use the term sudden adult death. And he predicted we will find the causes of it, and we are finding the causes of it now. But this national survey, where I was a junior pathologist at the time, 82% are ischemic. We all know the majority of sudden deaths are ischemic. So the big issue for pathologists is to determine, well, when is it ischemic? That there is significant narrowing of a coronary artery. Is there scarring? Is there acute infarction? Is there thrombosis? Is there fibrosis? If you have a combination of them, but what if you've got atheroma on its own with no damage in the ventricle? How significant is the atheroma? Are we missing underlying channelopathies and cardiomyopathies? So looking at the whole heart and the spleen and the genetic material and deciding whether it's normal or not, these are the sampling we do from anterior, lateral and posterior right ventricle, the right ventricular outflow tract and the septum, anterior, lateral and posterior left ventricle. At mid-ventricular level, when it's a normal heart, you will obviously sample the abnormal areas if you've got an abnormal heart. You'll take more. And this is the sampling we do, and these are the blocks that we will take. And we'll take 7 blocks initially. We may go back and take more if we're undecided on the first initial histological analysis, but a minimum of 7 blocks. Never 1 block from right or left ventricle, a minimum of 7 must be taken. And what we found, looking at nearly 7,000 cases, that this is obviously non-ischemic cases mainly. Sudden arrhythmic death and cardiomyopathies dominate as the causes of sudden death in our database. And these are the criteria on the right-hand side that we use pathologically. I won't bore you with them, but they've published in this paper as to what we mean by each of the cardiomyopathies, myocarditis, etc. And you can see here that the majority of deaths are in the under 50 age group. The prime is in the 20s, 30s and 40s, sudden death occurs. It decreases, obviously, non-ischemic deaths decrease as you get older, whereas ischemic will predominate in the older age group. And lucky for us ladies in the audience, it's men who die suddenly. We all know that from all series throughout the world, it's almost universal, males predominate for both SADS, cardiomyopathies, ischemic heart disease, nearly all entities apart from hypertension probably, and congenital heart disease. And here, we've over 53% of our cases are SADS, 22% are cardiomyopathies, but we still get ischemic. Either the pathologist has hasn't looked at the coronary artery possibly, or they will send it. But generally, they just don't look at the coronary arteries. So we do still diagnose ischemic heart disease. Congenital, you will have a group in the minority, as well as valve disease, myocarditis, hypertension, aortic dissection, and other weird and wonderful things like, you could say, anomalous coronary arteries. The conduction tissue is very rare. Only 1% are due to conduction tissue abnormalities in our experience. So the normal heart predominates. So it's actually very, very important for a pathologist to be familiar with the normal heart and the variations of the histological appearance of the normal heart. And we have shown that the male heart is much heavier than the female heart naturally. The muscle is thicker in males, the fat is more in females. So there's a wide variation. We still do not know children's normal hearts. 11-year-old child, what's a normal heart in an 11-year-old? We don't know. Pediatric pathologists will discuss it, but there's a wide variation in the weight of the normal heart in an 11-year-old. So we still have to look into children. And again, as I say, this is from the age groups. Blue is over 35 and red is less than 35. So in all these entities, you will have older, naturally in ischemic heart disease, you'll have older people. But in the cardiomyopathies and in the SADs, we have a good percentage who are older than 35. And this is now, to say that the green here is SADs, where the heart is normal, and the gold is cardiomyopathies. And each series, which come from Australia, Spain, Ireland, USA, Switzerland, Denmark, from Padua, from the Veneto region, from USA, you can see the massive variation in the different studies. And I think most of the variation comes around because of the selected groups that are looked at, the limited numbers, because the numbers range from 200 cases up to ours, 7,000 cases. So there's a wide variation. And in the USA, the results are based on death certification, not complete autopsies. So you've got to really analyze, and that's why there's such a variation in the incidences. And these are the inherited arrhythmic syndrome. I don't need to bore you. You in the audience will be well aware of them. They're clinically, obviously this is for the cardiologists and clinicians to determine in the families. So the role of us pathologists, when we think it's a cardiomyopathy, we've eliminated now the normal heart. We're quite happy, the heart's normal. We've a sudden adult death with negative toxicology. That will go down one pathway with the cardiologist. When you suspect there is a cardiomyopathy, you're now thinking, is it genetic? Is it hypertension? What is this due to? So we issued guidelines in the European Association of Cardiovascular Pathology on genetically determined cardiomyopathies, because this is something that pathologists didn't have any guidelines on. And the pivotal role of the pathologist and guiding the family screening. And what type of cardiomyopathies did we find? Well, the blue up there is idiopathic hypertrophy, where we found an increase in heart weight, nothing else, and we didn't know the cause. No hypertension, no diabetes, no other history, drugs, etc. The second most common cause, almost sharing equal billing, is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in red and arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy in yellow. Then we had dilated, making up 16% of our cases. And finally, we had OCM, which is obesity-related cardiomyopathy. And this is a controversial diagnosis, a new diagnosis for us pathologists, where a person is obese, normal coronary arteries, but the heart is heavier than normal. No other cause of death, nothing. So it's increasing in incidence in our database. But whether it is a unique entity remains now to be established with family follow-up and genetics. And then you have the other weird and wonderful cardiomyopathies like metabolic Fabry's disease. So HOCM and arrhythmogenic predominate with idiopathic hypertrophy. So what about HOCM? Well, it's a very important cause of sudden death in sport, which Gerardo Finocchiario, who'll be talking to you later, I think by online, he'll be online, yes? I'll talk and he will mention this, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and idiopathic hypertrophy. Idiopathic hypertrophy is where you don't get myocyte disarray when you do histology on sampling. That's what's important. That's what eliminates hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And look at this. This is work that, again, with Gerardo showing how hypertrophic cardiomyopathy presents and the important role of the autopsy. 78% of all our cases were diagnosed at the autopsy. They weren't diagnosed in the living. The family didn't know they had the condition. So the vital role, we are the most important from the point of view of the diagnosis, but we've got to get it right. You can see only 26% had previous cardiac symptoms. Death during exercise, 23%, and average age was 43. 73% males, again male dominant. But look at them, 16% had coronary atheroma, but it wasn't significant. But maybe a pathologist would overinterpret that atheroma and miss the diagnosis that they didn't do histology. The other point is that heart weight is normal in over 30% of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy cases. The heart looks normal. histology shows the myocyte disarray, and that's particularly linked to troponin T mutations. So a normal heart does not eliminate hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. What about arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, which is increasing in incidence in our opinion? And here's a young girl who got an awful lot of publicity about a year ago in the UK, young, healthy girl. She'd previously gone to her A&E department, sounds familiar, with palpitations, and the ECG was looked at and she was told she was fine, she could go home. She dropped dead about 6 months later. And we made a diagnosis of arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, and review of her ECG pointed towards arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. As a result, the family are actively campaigning about screening with ECGs in A&E departments throughout the country. That couldn't be done by a busy A&E specialist. There should be always a cardiologist on standby. And as you know, arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, which was originally called right-sided or right ventricular, is now, we label it arrhythmogenic, because you get both ventricles involved in the majority of cases. And we have published on this, showing biventricular involvement in this condition. You've got to do histology to show the fibrosis as well as fat in both right and left ventricle. And here are examples, the variation in the amount of fat that can be seen. In addition, 30% of our arrhythmogenic cases, the heart looks normal to the naked eye. Even when we go back to look at it after seeing the histology, it still looks normal. So again, you can have a normal looking heart with arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. It's the histology gives you the diagnosis. And as you know, I won't bore you with the genetics, but do not misdiagnose obesity cardiomyopathy as arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. This is where you'll simply have fatty infiltration of the right ventricle is quite prominent. Again, in obese middle-aged women, you get a lot of fat in the right ventricle. I think pathologists, and we get cases every week, underdiagnosed possibly, but overdiagnosed. In other words, they're too much diagnosis. You need, and also as well, the right ventricle has a lot more collagen than the left ventricle. So pathologists, because they're not familiar with what the normal heart looks like, because they don't take histology routinely, they may overdiagnose arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. And obesity, that's a heart weight of greater than 500 grams in a male, greater than 400 in a female, and increase in epicardial fat thickness. And this, with Joseph Westerby, my colleague now at the department, we've published on obesity cardiomyopathy. Is it a distinct entity? Is it genetic? Is it acquired? This remains to be answered. And the epicardial fat is generally quite extensive, right? And idiopathic hypertrophy, that's another entity which Gerardo will talk about family follow-up. Is it genetic? Is it exercise related? But it's not related to HOCM. Initial examination or follow-up does not show HOCM genes in idiopathic hypertrophy. DCM is the least common that we see, and it's pretty non-specific in dilated cardiomyopathy. So the role of the pathologist is to delineate clearly the phenotype at autopsy when somebody dies suddenly. You correlate with the cardiologist with family follow-up, genetic testing, and you have a multidisciplinary approach in which the pathologist should be a vital member of that multidisciplinary group. It's made up of the pathologist, the cardiologist, genetic counselors, geneticists, primary care, the general practitioner. We have specialized nurses who actually look after the families in inherited cardiac conditions, as well as psychological support. So now what we have in the United Kingdom, how am I doing time-wise? Okay, about 2 minutes, right? We have set up a national program, and what we've done, pathways to improve access to genomics-driven clinical service. And this is in the NHS, Genomics England, we've done it. So we've a multidisciplinary team in each region, and what we've got are 7 regions. And each of these regions, we have a genetic hub. And the major thing is we have a coordinator. The coordinator, who's generally a nurse with experience with inherited cardiac conditions, she coordinates with the family, with the coroner, and with the cardiology team. And she makes sure the histology is taken. She makes sure that the genetic material gets to the genetic department. And she organises the actual multidisciplinary groups and monthly meetings of a review of cases. This person is vital to coordinate, I think, within each region. And then molecular genomics testing directory has been done. It's called R138, and we will test for Brugada, long QT, all the channelopathies, and also the cardiomyopathies. To my knowledge, there's about 400 genes being tested at this moment in time. And we've just finished 2 years, and we're about to coordinate and publish on this. So in other words, we hope in our country that we've set up what we think is an ideal scenario where we will get genetic and pathology coordination with family follow-up, so that actually people will know what did their relative die of, and also whether there is a mutation or not, and whether clinically they've been followed up to express a phenotype within that family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sheppard. In Italy, we said that Lectio magistralis doesn't need comment, but how many suggestions? Autopsy rate decreased dramatically. It's a whole problem all over the world. But I think that it's our fault. Why don't we teach to do autopsy? Why don't we teach students to ask for autopsy? And who pay for it? Yeah, it's a big problem. Yesterday during our dinner with Professor Jakjovski said, we need money. We need money. So, and the role of guidelines. Is there a medical liability for pathologists who doesn't attend guidelines?
Very good question.
And,
yes, there is. The forensic pathologists have been brought to court by families. They've been sued successfully, but no, GMC, General Medical Council, they've been brought up by the General Medical Council, and they have been, as you say, but it's not adequate. They have to be really grossly negligent to really, because a pathologist may say, well, I didn't need to because I made a clinical decision not to take the tissue. But now with the Royal College guidelines,
of course,
that can now be put to them.
And in Italy, we have a law that says that also pathologists who doesn't attend guidelines may be, from a penal point of view, be judged. And a database. Now we are going to finally to buy a database, and we probably in the first months of 2025 we finally can start with database. So thank you so much.
Okay.
So I invite Zlatko to share with me moderation if you want, and it's a pleasure for me to open the session of pathologists. And the first speaker is where is Djordje? Yeah, Professor Djordje Alempijević from Belgrade, who talks about the incidence and autopsy rate for sudden cardiac death, the Serbian experience.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my sincere thanks for the organizers, and particular to Professor D'Errico, who had invited me to Trieste. And it's my great honor that I'm today here with you. So I'm coming from Republic of Serbia, where I serve as a professor of forensic medicine at Belgrade University. And additionally to that, I hold the position of president of section of forensic medicine at the Serbian Medical Society, which is a unique professional platform that brings together about 60 actively practicing forensic practitioners in the country. So it's very difficult to address such honorable audience after a lecture that has been given by Professor Sheppard. As you know, when I was about to prepare this presentation and to come to deliver it to you, so I was thinking what to tell here, as we in Serbia do not have that much experience in sudden cardiac death. Of course, we do see such cases on a daily basis, but we don't have a structured system to follow up on the cases, and we are so far dealing on a case-to-case basis just to solve the problem and to close the case with the prosecutors. Then I put some definitions which has been already known to you and has been mentioned, but as a forensic pathologist, I would just like to add some fuel onto fire, you know, and to say that even our definition on unexpected is something which can be added to what has been said previously. So what is unexpected death? Basically, that's something which refers to death occurring before it was anticipated, often without any warning signs. And also when we try to assess the definition of sudden death in a context of forensic pathology, we may say also that it's a death of well or apparently healthy people. So what it refers basically to individuals who are perceived to be well or only mildly unwell. And such a person is someone from whom neither caregivers nor attending physicians identifying any serious illness that would keep that person in a hospital, or they don't see that these people require immediate hospitalization and emergency treatment. So just for sake of time economy, as I understand that we are running slightly behind the schedule, I would not repeat concept of sudden cardiac death as it's already discussed here widely. But I would like to let's say, to one more time to repeat this the difference between sudden cardiac death in a younger population in comparison to adult and senior population. With the second group, you know, where the coronary artery disease and ischemic heart disease is prevailing as a cause of sudden cardiac death. But for us as a forensic pathologist, we more look into structural anomalies and what we can see either with our own eyes on macroscopical examination or histology. But it is becoming more and more important to look on non-structural or functional or pro-arrhythmogenic disorders, which involves a blend of genetic testing and something which will be told later by those who are more competent on the subject. Epidemiology is also interesting, epidemiology of sudden cardiac deaths. And we can see different figures coming from different regions, countries. So, for instance, if we look into figures from the United States of out of hospital cardiac arrest, so it's a relatively widespread phenomenon. So it's 0.1% of US population. In Europe, it's a bit less. I mean, it depends on a study design and on the let's say structure of data that has been used for analysis. But however, it concerns a number of people. So, for instance, only in US there are approximately 300,000 deaths that are classified as sudden cardiac deaths. So if we broaden this concept beyond cardiopathology or pathology and forensic pathology, so it does impact our societies, and it impacts also public health. So that's another link that we have to pay attention to. It's said, I mean, for instance, if you look into these figures of 300,000 deaths a year in the United States due to sudden cardiac death, I mean, which are believed to be due to sudden cardiac death, it means that 1,000 people approximately are dying on a daily basis. Like already, as we have kicked our lesson here, so it seems that like 30 people had died already due to sudden cardiac death being back in the United States, as one person dies every 90 seconds. Just now to focus and to narrow down to country where I'm coming from. So for those, and I believe that you are all aware that we are in a country in a middle income group of countries located in Southern East Europe. So population is about 7 million, and we have let's say, broad system of healthcare, which is free access, but of course there are some limitations of this system and some barriers for particularly vulnerable groups. It was, according to data on National Institute of Public Health, cardiovascular diseases were the leading cause of mortality in Serbia in 2011. And they were accounting to approximately 54% of all deaths registered on an annual basis. Although a declining trend has been observed, primarily due to a reduction in deaths from acute coronary syndrome following significant changes in treatment protocols, the number of deaths due to cardiovascular disease remained high, totaling 52,000, approximately 53,000, which equates to one death in every 10 minutes, if you narrow down to population of Serbia. And of those, approximately 18% were attributed to ischemic heart disease. It was a long time ago, almost more than 40 years, when there was established a register of coronary heart disease, and it was at the time of the former Yugoslavia, which however, this register is suffering from a number of problems over this period, and we can now say that it's inadequate data set, and it also only look into coronary heart disease. So we are now talking about much broader context than only coronary heart diseases. Therefore, there was another initiative in 2006 driven by national needs, and it was led by Institute of Public Health to establish the acute coronary syndrome population register. But again, it's focused on coronary syndrome and acute coronary syndrome. So we need to have a broader register to capture all instances of sudden cardiac deaths, which we all know are not only due to coronary diseases. So unfortunately, and that's something which is missing, and we hope that this joint effort and this day that we will spend together here will enable us to learn some more about the existing register in Italy and elsewhere, and to implement it in future in my country. So if we look in cause of death statistics in Serbia, it was a research that we have done in our institute. So we have looked in nationally mortality register that is maintained by Serbian Statistics Office. And we looked for 10 years period, and there were about slightly more than 100,000 deaths for the observed period. And the total number of deaths that were coded with R codes were almost 48,000. Which means that approximately 4.7 deaths per year were coded as by using of some R codes. When we examined the distribution of R-coded deaths certificates by age group, we found that approximately 722 deaths of individuals younger than 55 years of age were not subjected to a proper death investigation, resulting in an R-code classification for the cause of death. And we are all aware of goals of postmortem investigation in cases of sudden death and sudden cardiac death. So we need to look into structural changes, but also to assess whether there are non-structural arrhythmogenic disorders, or it was due to some other factors that might be affecting the life and the health of the person, like intoxications, use of illicit drugs, and other unnatural causes that might cause sudden death of a person. In cases of sudden cardiac death, the autopsy remains, as it was already underscored, the first and often the only opportunity to accurately determine and register the cause of death. Regardless of whether the autopsy in suspected sudden cardiac death is clinical or forensic, it should follow a sequential and structural examination process. All aspects of the autopsy procedures should adhere to established standards, to mention, for instance, guidelines of the autopsy investigation of sudden cardiac death. But if we come to forensic medical autopsies, we should also stick to certain standards. And let me remind you on the Committee of Ministers of Council of Europe recommendations or harmonization on autopsy, on medical legal autopsy rules, and it's moreover, it's important with this massive movement of population across Europe, to have standardized practices of medical legal autopsies in member states of Council of Europe or EU. Even if and we are all aware that even if we stick to all these standards, there might be still some number of cases when with thorough investigation we would not find a plausible explanation for cause of death. And there has been a number of studies on these matters, which are showing different results, but we can roughly say that approximately 5 to 10% of cases might not have a plausible explanation, and the percentage of this undetermined, basically, cases may even be higher if we look into statistics that are concerning younger population dying of sudden deaths. Now, to tell you something about trends of medical legal autopsies in Belgrade, as the major city in Serbia and the capital of the country. So if you look into this diagram, you will see that the population has been increased from about 1.2 million back in 1970, so over 50 years. So it increased for about 500,000. So now the population is around 1.7 million. Of course, it gives a rise to a number of deaths per year, so that's natural. We still have a similar or same number of autopsies as it used to be when it comes to forensic medical autopsies, as it used to be 50 years back. So if you look into this red line, so it gives you a flavor and an impression that autopsy rate is constantly on a downslope in this period. So we have had recently a meeting which we organized in Belgrade with our colleagues from public health, and the idea was to look into the causes of this. To see how we can tackle with this problem, there are several issues that we may put forward. So that's First of all, that forensic practitioners are practicing in different formats. Some of our colleagues are employed by Ministry of Health, and they are providing services within a framework of healthcare institutions. Some practitioners, like myself, for instance, are employed by universities who are also providing services to healthcare system, but we are a part of Ministry of Education. Then there are some colleagues who are working for Ministry of Defense, but as luckily they don't have that much work to do, so they also offer service to civilians outside of defense, military forces. And last but not least, we have also forensic practitioners working for Ministry of Interior. So that creates a situation where we don't have in a country a unique authority which can impose some standards to all these forensic practitioners that are practicing in different formats. Like in other countries, there are some, of course, limitation in resources. When it comes to forensic medical autopsies, so it's a decision which is made by, again, like in the United Kingdom, not by coroners, but by public prosecutors. So namely, the decision lays on people who does not have medical qualification. So they receive an input from doctors who are examining deaths, so who are obliged to report certain cases, including the cases where they cannot establish the cause and manner of death only by looking into medical files and examining the body of a dead person. But then public prosecutors, basically, they would require additional information from police. And if there is no suspicion that a third party would be involved in this death, they would usually refrain of ordering autopsies because it will affect their budget and it will put additional work to them. So as a public prosecutor, so they are more interested to rule out any criminal involvement in that case, but they are not that much concerned if the person who died of natural cause died of disease A or disease B, because and they are not concerned with the public health and mortality statistics. So that's the problem. And finally, there is a problem in communication between doctors who are certifying death of a person, for instance, in an apartment or in a hospital, and the police, because that information sometimes is over the phone at night, and it might be distorted, which led to a wrongful decision wrongful from our medical point of view, but legally it would be certainly acceptable. But it's not everything that bad, and I can put forward two positive developments that might help us or that may serve as a base for future activities and the register of sudden cardiac deaths. So to start with this mechanism for updating of cause of death following the autopsy, and later on I will tell you something more about e-certificate of death. So in this complex diagram, I would suggest you to focus on this part which is outlined by this blue oval line. So what we have done in 2005, the pathologists, either clinical or forensic, who are performing an autopsy, once they close the case, once they reach the cause of death, they are issuing a so-called report on autopsy. It's not autopsy report like in details, but it's just a diagnosis based on ICD-10 classification, which is still in use in my country. So that autopsy report is filed by pathologists to National National Public Health Institute, which then updates data in that certificate for that very person, because a doctor who was certifying that usually once he or she will requesting clinical autopsy, he would put or she would put undetermined cause of death in such death certificate. And then the cause of death will be updated based on the autopsy findings. So we found that mechanism very, very useful, and it brings to public health information from the autopsy room. And it was only 3 years ago that, led by Ministry of Health, National Public Health Institute had created a web-based platform for that certificate. And that so-called e-POS system now allows any doctor from practicing anywhere in the country to log into the system and to fill out that certificate of the person whose body he or she has been examined. So that web-based system also has some controls, and such garbage codes cannot be introduced into a cause of death, which we hope will allow for improvement of mortality data. So in summary, sudden cardiac death remains a critical public health challenge both globally and in Serbia. Despite the universal healthcare system and efforts to monitor cardiovascular diseases, Serbia faces significant obstacles in accurately identifying and recording cases of sudden cardiac death. The declining rate of medical legal autopsies over the past decades has impeded our ability to understand the true incidence of sudden cardiac death and implement effective preventing strategies. The fragmentation of forensic services, legal constraints on ordering autopsies, and insufficient communication between medical practitioners and legal authorities have all contributed to this decline. These systemic issues not only affect the accuracy of mortality data, but also hinder opportunities to counsel families about potential inherited cardiac conditions, thereby missing critical chances for prevention of at-risk population. However, there are promising developments that offer a path forward. The routine practice of updating death certificates post-autopsy ensures that more accurate cause of death are recorded. Additionally, the implementation of national-wide web-based system for death registration and certification enhances data quality and facilitates early detection and correction of reporting issues. To improve the situation, it is imperative to standardize autopsy procedures and adhere strictly to established guidelines for the autopsy investigation of sudden cardiac death to ensure consistency and accuracy. Also to enhance interdisciplinary communication and foster better cooperation between medical practitioners, forensic experts, police, and legal authorities to ensure that autopsies are conducted when necessary. Then also we need some policy reforms and we need to advocate for legal and systematic changes that will empower medical professionals to influence on decision whether the autopsy should take place or not. And also we need to invest in training and resources first of all, to provide training for those who are involved in that certification, because they are those who may really make things to move as if they would request and if they would know how to conduct the information from the scene of death. It will, we believe, influence the decision makers to increase the number of medical legal autopsies. And last but not least, we also need to utilize national wide database for that registration and its full potential to better collect data and analyzing. And so by addressing all these challenges throughout coordinated efforts, we can significantly enhance our understanding of sudden cardiac death in Serbia. And this will not only improve mortality data, but also contribute to preventive healthcare measures and ultimately reducing the burden of cardiovascular diseases in our society. And so we are here and open to learn from from this distinguished audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Alempijević. It's very important to know what is happening in different countries because we all struggle from some insufficiencies in organization and policies, and this is the way to know how to cope with these problems. Now welcome Professor Chaido Spiliopoulou from Greece to speak on sudden cardiac death in infants and children.
Okay, I will, oh, sorry. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee because you gave us the opportunity to be in Trieste, to be with friends, with new partners, and I really appreciate your invitation. Of course, the sudden death of a child or an infant represents a shocking event for the families and is associated with significant psychological trauma. For the pathologist, sudden cardiac death must be absolutely identified before the cause of death is labeled undetermined or SIDS or SUDI or sudden unexpected death in childhood. We have many incidence rates of sudden cardiac death in the young, mainly from developed countries. Thank you, Stefano. Ranging from 0.7 per 100,000 population in Sweden, 1.8 in the UK, and as high as 10 per 100,000 population in the USA. Put a star here. Most of them are people from African origin. Definitely the postmortem examination is the key to identify the cause of death and to establish the cause of death with the three pillars: toxicology, histology, and genetics. When I saw in the program that Professor Sheppard will be here, I said, okay, this is the reason we are here today. Why we are here today? To explain to the pathologist how to perform the autopsy. No, it's because autopsy of all young sudden death cases is important to increase survival in family members left behind. And Professor Sheppard, you showed us this very interesting table showing that all presumed cardiac deaths are not cardiac deaths. For example, in this table, only 66% were cardiac death and 34% non-cardiac deaths attributed to neurological, pulmonary infections, etc. Okay, both congenital and acquired heart conditions cause sudden cardiac death in the young. And most common causes include, of course, structural heart and coronary abnormalities, arrhythmogenic syndromes, and myocarditis. If there is no obvious morphological abnormality, and if there is no post-mortem molecular testing, then cardiovascular pathology is likely to be underestimated and accordingly underreported. I have here another very interesting paper, again from England. This is a retrospective study from 2003 to 2018, two famous centers, Sheffield Children's Hospital and Barts Health Trusts. They performed PMEs of children up to 17 years old, and these PMEs were scrutinized. The total number is 1,882, But finally, the cases of sudden cardiac deaths in this study are 151. And it's interesting to see what are the causes. 36 of these 151 cases are inflammatory infections, myocarditis, all types of myocarditis, pericarditis, endocarditis, vasculitis, rheumatic fever, and meningoencephalitis with myocarditis. 6 cases of arrhythmias. This is the problem always for the pathologists with the arrhythmias. The long QT deafness syndrome, channelopathies, and arrhythmia secondary to pulmonary hypertension, ischemia, myocardial infarctions, and heart failure due to prematurity. 32 cases of cardiomyopathy, of course, hypertrophic dilated fibroelastosis, non-compaction left ventricle, GM1 gangliosidosis, we also had in our department 2 last year. Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome and anthracycline-associated cardiomyopathy for the kids who are receiving chemotherapy. Vascular non-inflammatory, 14 cases, all the problems of aorta and renal arteries and in general arterial problems, and 51 cases of congenital malformation, atrioventricular septal defects, PDA, hypoplastic left heart syndrome, Cri-du-Chat syndrome, valvular heart disease, and Down's syndrome-related prematurity. There is another very interesting paper from the Netherlands. They don't study PMEs here. They calculate all sudden cardiac arrests in infants and children for 18 years. Imagine, 2 major children's hospitals, Erasmus Sophia Children's Hospital and Amsterdam Medical Center. These 2 centers cover half of the population of the Dutch population. So they had 1,577 cases of arrest. And from these cases, they had 172 deaths with cardiovascular pathology. The important thing in this study is that 48% of these cases remain without any etiology, and this is our nightmare as pathologists. So now I'll tell you the Greek story. First we go to France, 1982. 2 very exceptional cardiologists, Marcus and Fontaine, described cases of cardiomyopathy, 24 adult cases. And some years later, 4 years later, a Greek doctor from the island of Naxos, his name was Protonotarios, he died from cancer, described 9 children with right ventricle arrhythmias associated with a stereotype cutaneous phenotype, peculiar woolly hair, and palmoplantar keratoderma. And these patients, 9 patients, belonged to 4 families, siblings, first cousins, indicating an autosomal recessive type of inheritance. They all had the same phenotype. And this colleague named the condition Naxos disease by the island of Naxos, where the cases were first identified and evaluated. And this is the woolly hair of the children, these are the hands, this is the heart and the ECG. After this publication, the doctors from Naxos and other Greek islands approached me to perform the autopsies of the kids. It was a very big problem because the kids were in Milos Island, Mykonos Island, Naxos Island, and they had to transfer the kids to Athens for the PME. And the prosecutor was always had problems with this transfer, and the parents and everything. We insisted so much. We implemented, you know, a strategy with the cardiology clinic of the medical school, and finally we succeeded. We had all the cases autopsied in Athens. We started to produce papers about the Naxos disease. We found the responsible gene, and now we are very happy because we have a pre-implantation kit, so we don't have any new babies with Naxos disease in our islands. From that time, we started, you know, to push our Ministry of Health and the General Secretariat for Research to give us money to create a Greek national network on precision medicine in cardiology, in rare disease, and prevention of sudden cardiac death. And we had a very good supervisory committee with 3 famous Greek cardiologists, and the supervisor was Perry Elliott, a professor of cardiology, molecular cardiology from the UK. This network exists now, as I told you, it's called iCardiacNet, and is functioning through the Social Security eGov program in order to keep the personal data. Every time we have a death of a person aged less than 35 years, we do the autopsy, we do toxicological analysis, we do histology, and we complete the autopsy report. Must be very, very detailed, very good report, and we keep blood samples and tissue samples fixed and frozen. If it's a case of sudden cardiac death, then we enter the registry of sudden cardiac death and we give a number to the case. After that, well, the network is informed about the case and they give us the permission to approach the family. We approach the family, counseling, referral to the nearest partner. Partner, I mean cardiology clinic in Athens or in other areas. You see here the 3 spots, it's Thessaloniki, Athens, and Heraklion in Crete, but we have also 34 more partners, cardiology clinics in Greece. The family goes to the cardiology clinic and they examined, they do everything they need, and they put the family in the registry of inherited cardiac disease if there is a clear indication of is an inherited cardiac disease. Then this family goes to the genetic committee to approve the cost of the genetic analysis. If the committee approves the genetic analysis, then goes to the registry of the genetic data bank, the whole family. It's a very complicated system, this network. On the top, on the right is Onassis Hospital. Onassis, the rich man, gave us a hospital in Athens. Is the biggest cardiosurgery center in Greece. And on the other side is our department. And then we have all the departments of forensic medicine, cardiology clinics. The 3, this one and this one are the 2 labs for molecular genetics. And this is our information department. Okay, what does this cardiac net? We produce protocols, postmortem protocols for our pathologists, clinical protocols, and genetic panel. we change the genetic panel, not me, the biologist and the cardiologist. And we produce registries. We have the sudden death registry, the clinical registry, and the genetic registry. Look, some very interesting results. It's from Onassis Hospital, and then it's from the rest of the network. 2.7 relatives per proband. Proband, is the first affected person from a family with positive genetic result. Very good results. And in the rest of the network is 1.6. The population of Greece is 10 millions, 5 millions live in the Athens area, half of the population. Now we have a very clear idea for all these 5 years about the cardiomyopathy clusters in Greece. The biggest problem is here, north of Greece, and in Crete, in Heraklion. The genetic, we are not involved in the genetic decision, of course. We know that in the cases put in the genetic data bank, we do now clinical exome next generation sequencing. That means more than 5,500 genes using the human gene mutation database. If there is a very clear indication that the person has cardiomyopathy, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, we don't do all these genes, they do only the short panel, 104 genes. With this system, we don't see only cardiac disease. We see Wilson's disease, Huntington disease, and we have also another clear picture in Greece. And the problem are the islands, because the insular population creates these clusters. Okay, up to date, I'm finishing. 5,975 families with history of inherited cardiovascular disease or sudden death are in the registry, the clinical registry. 694 families are in the genetic registry. I don't give you the deaths because in the registry of sudden cardiac death, I enter as University of Athens and I can see the whole picture. I need, you know, the information system to help me. And I finish with this, your slide, Mary. We have pathologists. The network works quite well. We have pathologists, cardiology, genetic counselor, geneticians, primary care physicians, specialized nurses, psychologists, but we don't have patient support groups. This is our next step for the next 5 years. Mille grazie per l'attenzione.
Thank you, Chara, and you are right. Before dinner we were colleagues. After dinner now we are friends. So you're right. And a few things. I think that all the problem we have with pathologists, with adults, in sudden cardiac death in childhood, all the problems are amplified because knowledge for sudden cardiac death in childhood is different and go, in my opinion, deeper with child. And I'm really impressed from your experience in Greece. You are in the middle of the path. And so we have many to learn from your experience. So congratulations.
The reason is Laxus disease. The reason is all these kids who died 12 years, 13, 14, up to 17 years, who died between 1986 and 1996. And our, dream was to create this network. And it works very well. Every time we see a new case in the newspapers, in the internet now, we call immediately the pathologist to say, okay, keep the samples. You must keep, I didn't want to give more details, but we keep not only the heart tissue, we keep spleen, liver, brain, we keep a lot of samples according to our Human Tissue Act. And also, we don't have problem with the personal data because we do this through this electronic system of the Ministry of Health. So this was the big achievement, to have the Ministry of Health and Innovation in our side.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce the third speaker, Dr. Davide Radaelli. Is going to conclude his PhD at Trieste University, and he talked about the experience of the Friuli Venezia Giulia register of sudden cardiac death. So, Davide.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Professor D'Errico, to allow me to tell you about our journey, our little story, because we are quite a young register. In fact, our journey started in 2020, thanks to the collaboration of our medical legal department, Professor D'Errico in person, and the cardiology department, with Professor Sinagra, where when they wrote this project proposal, a protocol of the creation of a regional registry of sudden cardiac death in our small region in Italy, and this document presented all the useful information from the inclusion criteria to the multidisciplinary approach, focusing mostly on the multidisciplinary approach about the role of each discipline. And why they wanted to build this register? Because, of course, we all are here because the sudden cardiac death is a significant public health challenge, and because in our region there was no system, no scheduling, no systematic collection of data of sudden cardiac death cases, and of course there was no preventative strategies for the families of subjects who die suddenly. And we were lucky because the regional administration embraced all the concept present inside the document. They enact the law number 26 in the 2020, where they funded the creation of this register with two main purposes. Of course, there was the epidemiological point of view to identify the etiological causes of sudden cardiac death within the region, and of course to use the preventative strategies for the family members, but also with thinking in the future with research purposes too. And it was important because the region defines that the coordination center was here in Trieste, where the coordination was held by the medical legal department of our institution and the cardiology. So how are we organized? We create an alert where when someone younger than 50 years old dies suddenly, suspectedly healthy subject, we ask the pathologists who do the autopsy or the necroscopic department to fill up a form just to inform us about all the useful data, and which I means the birth of date, the name, surname, the GPs, how can we contact the GPs, and all the useful information, the anamnesis. If he is the pathologist, we ask him to compile just to define the principal detail of the findings of the autopsy. And then, once the autopsy is performed, of course, we ask to collect fluids for toxicological analysis and for genetics, and of course to retain the heart in fixed in formalin. Then we book for the transport, and we centralize all these samples in Trieste. And once they arrive in Trieste, the magic happens, as we say, because we send to our fantastic toxicological laboratory in the Burlo Garofalo Hospital the sample of peripheral blood and the urine to do the toxicology analysis. And we keep the heart here in Cattinara, and we book for a postmortem cardiac MRI. Our radiologists, we elaborate a quite detailed program of how we should report the cardiac MRI, how to use the images, because when we collect the report, using the guidelines they gave us, we started, of course, using the guidelines to study the heart. So if the radiologists tell us that they saw an area just below the valve, we can now dissect that area, collect the sample for histology on top of the normal histology we collect, and then just to see if that area is something useful or not. And then, of course, once we've got all these information, the toxicological report, the postmortem cardiac MRI, and the cardiac report, we send it back to the pathologist who ask our reference. And of course, it is extremely important, but because when the heart dissection there is a suspect of a cardiomyopathy or a SADS, there should be a second opinion, which is performed here in Trieste by an expert cardiovascular pathology. With all this information, we submit the causes of death, which I recollect here. It could be a not sudden cardiac death, it could be a sudden cardiac death due to non-genetic disease, or there can be like a probable or certain genetic disease. In this last case, we contact the family members because we filled up the form before. We ask them for the genetic consent, explain everything, all the useful information, why they need to give consent, why it's useful for them. And then we send the samples of central blood fluids and the families, of course, to the genetic lab in the hospital, Burlo Garofalo Hospital, for the genetic counseling. And once we receive this counseling, we contact the local cardiology care facilities in the different territories, just to give them and ask them to do the screening of a family and to do the cardiac counseling. And here a little bit of data. In these 4 years, 3 years and a half, we collect 121 subjects. We are today we are up to 123 because we received 2 cases this week, but I didn't manage to update the graph here. Most of the cases came from our province, the province of Trieste, followed by the Udine province, Pordenone, and Gorizia. As Professor Sheppard said, most of the subjects were male, the 78%, with a mean age of 42 plus minus 10 years old. We collect in the beginning even subjects who were older than 50 years old, so we were quite higher than the original purposes, because these subjects were selected because they had family history positive for sudden cardiac death, and we just wanted to study them properly. Who requested the autopsies? We are quite happy that during these years the GPs embraced the concept. So in the 30% of the cases, the GPs requested the autopsies, and followed by the 26% of the cases of the territorial prosecutor offices. Thanks to Professor D'Errico and Professor Moreschi from Udine, the prosecutor of Trieste and Udine, they embraced the document, the presence of a register, and now Gorizia too and Pordenone too. So when someone young dies suddenly within the region, they should ask to a pathologist who follow the guidelines, who follow the register, who is happy to follow the register to perform the autopsy. The circumstances of death, so most of the people die at home. Many of them die at bed. It's like the 11%, but most of them died just during the day, not during the night. The 12% died just immediately reaching the emergency department. A cardiac symptoms prior to death was present in the 22% of the subject, while in the 52% of the subject, no cardiac symptom prior to death was reported, while in the 26%, it was unknown because the death was not testified, was not witnessed. A family history positive family history of sudden cardiac death were present in only the 9% of cases, and this is quite strange compared to other statistics, but that's what we got. And comorbidity were present in 70 subjects. The 20 subjects had a positive history of drug abuse, which was still in course or in the past, while 19 subjects had hypertension, and followed by obesity, diabetes, and epilepsy. Once we collect all the autopsy data, in the 89%, the causes of death was probably the cardiac cause, because we couldn't find anything, while in 7% of the cases, at the end of all the analysis, the definitive non-cardiac cause of death was found. The cardiac, post-mortem cardiac MRI was performed in 96 cases, with 79% of cases. We decided this because when the heart, we put like 5 days after the death of the subject to do the cardiac MRI, because there was a post-mortem like autolysis putrefaction that could interfere with the cardiac MRI, so it was not useful to do it. And the radiologist found significant with, I mean, like findings that he says this could be something. This could be like a myocardial infarction, this could be edema, this could be fibrosis, so you need to investigate properly. And then the heart weight, it was just within the normal, with male heart weight a little bit heavier than the female. And this is the least amount of dimension we asked to collect to the pathologist. Here in Trieste, we follow the St. George's guidelines, because I was lucky to be hosted by Professor Sheppard. So we started to collect, to measure even the subepicardial fat, dividing it with a muscle, and taking other different measurements with the valves and everything to take pictures. Pictures is important. The toxicology analysis was performed in 110 subjects with 91%. I know we should reach almost the 100%, but not always it was possible to perform the toxicology analysis. It was significant in 29 subjects. Significant in here, it means that the drugs found, the substance found was relevant to the death of a subject. And it's quite strange, because the first substance we found was methadone, followed by benzodiazepine, but of course cocaine, morphine, heroin, and pregabalin. And this is a collection of what we have found of our database. In 38%, the death was due to an ischemic heart disease, followed by the substance abuse. And then 11% of cases were died where was a remarkable heart, negative toxicology, and everything was negative, so we call them SADs, followed by hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and aortic dissection. 15 subjects, we managed to collect the consent. We had a little bit of problems with some families, because we didn't give the consent for the genetic analysis, so we couldn't test them. So we managed to test 15 subjects and family, where the morphological diagnosis was a cardiomyopathy, or there was a hint of the presence of congenital heart disease or SADS. In 5 subjects, we found the presence of a likely pathogenic variants, while in other 5 subjects, we found VOS. The last 5, I didn't put them here, were completely negative, but this is quite difficult to interpret, and I will leave the genetistics in the third section. So this is our pathogenic variants. I wanted to highlight these 2 cases with 2 females, 29 and 43 years old. Both had an history of epilepsy in infancy, and we managed to find for both likely pathogenic variants for the RIR2, which is related to CPPP. And the last one, because it was a male of 20 years old, he died during the autopsy. It was found cardiac tamponade due to the aortic dissection, and we were lucky that the pathologist was an expert cardiovascular pathologist. He had a bicuspid aortic valve, so he said we need genetic testing because it has marfanoid aspects. So we managed to find a pathogenic variant of FBN1. And since the inception of the register, we managed to screen a total of 7 families. I know it's not the HARA numbers, but we are quite young, and we are a small region in Italy. But we are quite happy, because we need to ask those families if they are happy or not about our work. In conclusion, I wanted to highlight the fact that the purposes of the law was to tell about to monitor, identify the basis of sudden cardiac death. And we started to manage to calculate the incidence. We are, as I said, the entire population of our region is a little bit more than 1 million people. Half of these are under of age of 50. and we calculate the incidence of sudden cardiac death, which from 2021 to 2023 increased of 60%. So probably this is not definitive number because the presence is not widely used by other non-compliant pathologists. And another thing, I know it's not cardiac related, but it's forensic pathology related. We compare our results with results present in our National Institute of Statistics, the official national statistics. And we have found that according to them, unfortunately, there was no data last day up to 2022 and up to 2023. But in the general population, so people above 50, the total amount of subjects who died for drug abuse were only 5, while in 2021 we found 7 under 50. And I know there will be more because we, as institute, we did autopsy of people who died above 50, who died for drug abuse. So probably the number are not reliable and we need to do something more. However, it's not a perfect mechanism and we need fine-tuning. And I'm saying this because from the autopsy to the execution of a post-mortem cardiac MRI, we've got 32 days. The mean is 32 days, which is quite long, both for the pathologist, for the family, and for everything for us. Unfortunately, we're using the machine, which is used for the living patient. So we need to collect that spot particularly, and when one machine broke, it's broken, so we cannot use others. And it's not autopsy rate. I'm sorry, it's probably a misspelling, but I calculate. I saw on the Italian National Database of Statistics the total amount of deaths of people younger than 50 who died within the region, and subtract, of course, we try to see how many of these we've got inside the database, and the number are quite low. And we knew which was the causes because, especially for us forensic, there are forensic pathologists who are not compliant with the register. We are trying to involve them, to explain them, and we are going up. And of course, there was also a research purposes. So we have said, and I'm recalling to Professor Sheppard what she said about ischemia. What's the amount of stenosis that is significant? We don't know, actually, because for someone is 75, but 75 for me is different than 75 for Professor D'Errico, because my highs, it's snake eyes. There is a super bias, which is the pathologist, the experience of a pathologist. So we are trying to, just try to define, can we use the omics to help us to defining the problem? So we made the things simple. So because we were not expert in metabolomics, we studied the lipidomics. We analyzed the fresh frozen heart tissue coming from 3 subjects who died for ischemia and 3 subjects who died from drug abuse, in particular methadone, just to see if there were different metabolites present in these 2 groups. And we managed to find that actually there are statistically significant differences in the presence of the two groups. In particular, the PCA, which is this graph here, the principal component analysis, both groups, there is a little bit of overlap, so they are not completely different. But if we see the PC1, the principal component analysis 1 and 2, the main 2 differences, some ways, we reach up to 55%. So what we know that if we find metabolites within these 2 groups, we can define the differences between the 2 groups, with 55% of differences between these 2 groups. And then we saw the concentration and where they were actually statistical differences. There was the phosphatidylcholine with long chain and short chain, which were more concentrated, more present in the hyperacute, in the ischemic heart, while the ceramide were more present in the methadone deaths. So maybe this could be useful. Of course, we are trying to implement this with other causes of death, expanding the statistics, because this was a pilot study just to know if we can this can be useful. What's the future perspective? Of course, surf the wave of artificial intelligence. I am lucky because my partner works for AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. She works with the AI, so I'm lucky. I played with the billions of AI models, and what we can do, what we could do with these models, it's amazing. So we can create a model, feed him with all our data, and he can help us to define complex cases. Just to give an idea, we can feed it with the Omnix data and give us like a predictive model to a subject, which one, how to help the family, and so on. And then, of course, the main purposes of this meeting. Okay, so I'm finished. This is a review of a sudden cardiac death registry present in the world. There is inconsistent coverage about the world. There was no inclusion criteria for some are not autopsy based. So what we see with Professor Sheppard is that the ethnicity can impact in the causes of death. So if we manage to share the slides, the case, all the data, the methodology first, we may be able to explain some of these deaths. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you, Davide. Thank you for giving to me the opportunity to thank all the colleagues, pathologists from Udine, from Pordenone, and thanks to our radiologist, Lorenzo Pagnan. Thank you so much for your efforts. Our genetist, Djordje Alempijević, and his head, Professor Gasparini, and our toxicologist, Riccardo Adobati. Thank you so much, Davide, and congratulations.
Our next speaker is Professor Silke Grabherr, the head of the Institute of Legal Medicine of Lausanne and Geneva in Switzerland, and she will show us one of the most valuable approaches in diagnosis of sudden cardiac death and sudden death, application of postmortem imaging modalities.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to come in here and to talk a little bit about postmortem imaging. Of course, you have already heard, you don't see everything in imaging, but there are also things you don't see in autopsy, and even sometimes it will help you to guide biopsy and do the histology. And my aim today is to show you how these imaging methods are useful in order to do such things. So first of all, what we are talking about when we talk about postmortem imaging, it is a part of the big field called forensic radiology, meaning forensic pathology combined with radiology. But we have the two parts, of course, the postmortem radiology and the clinical forensic medicine. And of course, today I don't talk about this. If we combine it with other imaging methods, such as simple photography, 3D photography, or 3D methods, we talk about forensic imaging. Now, different techniques are used today, and they all have one aim: to document and to visualize findings and objects in forensic and medical legal investigations, and which have an interest in this field. There are many different techniques. We have the basic techniques, means photography, photogrammetry, conventional X-ray, ultrasound, MDCT, so the multi-detector computed tomography, magnetic resonance imaging, and 3D surface scanning. And these basic methods can be combined with minimally invasive methods, such as image-guided biopsy, mostly used with ultrasound or CT, and post-mortem angiography. By talking about cardiac death and sudden cardiovascular death, I will talk today only about the MDCT. I will talk maybe a lot about post-mortem angiography, and a little topic will be about the MRI, as these techniques are useful in order to investigate cardiovascular death. First of all, PMCT, post-mortem computed tomography. It's a very fast examination. It's easy to handle, and you have very nice 3D reconstructions that may help if you have to go to court or to explain your results to non-medical persons. It has relatively low maintenance costs, and the machines are more accessible than others. It has an excellent visualization of skeletal system, lungs, and gas or air. But of course, it has disadvantages such as a lot of radiation, data storage problems, most important, limited soft tissue contract, and of course, you need training for a correct interpretation of your findings. So you see already that soft tissue is not the big thing for CT, and that is the most important limitation if you want to investigate cardiac death. What can you see of the cardiovascular lesions? Not a lot with this technique, to be honest. You see blood collections that give you a suspicion of hemorrhage. You don't see the hemorrhage itself. You can have a suspicion of an aneurysm. You can have a suspicion of aortic dissection. It is useful for exclude really a trauma, so you can use it as a screening, and you can visualize calcification. By telling all this, I already show you there are limits, but also some advantages. Most of the time, PMCT is used as simple screening exam just before the autopsy or when a body arrives to an institute with no information. There it is really, really useful because you get quickly an overview of the body, and not only on the outside, but also on the inside. What you can do and what papers say that you can do, you can, for example, measure the cardiothoracic ratio on the postmortem CT, but also take care. You can see the heart is big, but you should use this information very carefully. It's done in clinics, but we don't have a lot of information about what is happening after death. So it's just an indication, give you one idea of it. You can look at the lungs, you can look, for example, if there is a pulmonary edema, which may give you information about a cardiac problem, but also take care because, for example, such findings, some infiltrations in the lungs, especially in the posterior region, you can have them all the time in postmortem CT. It's what we call inner lividity. So take care by interpreting postmortem data and don't do it just with normal clinical radiologists that are not trained to it. You can see, of course, calcifications. This is getting more interesting. So you can see if the coronary arteries have a lot of calcifications or not. You can see one very calcified artery here in this image. And of course, you can see if there are foreign bodies inside, for example, a stent in a coronary artery. Of course, this does not say to you if the stent is open or not. So you have to go further if you want to have this information. In clinics, a lot of people use the coronary artery calcium score, and this should give you an idea about atherosclerotic coronary artery disease. This is very important in clinics because, of course, you cannot dissect your patient before you know if there is really a vulnerable plaque, for example. But it gives you a hint and it's very often used. The gradation is done by what we call the Agathon score. And for example, no evidence, so no calcium means a Agathon score of 0, and it goes up to minimal, mild or moderate score, and even to severe, meaning the patient have a lot of risk to have a coronary problem because there is a lot of coronary calcification. So I told you it's used in clinics. We don't use it so often in post-mortem imaging. It just gives you the hint, maybe you should do further exams and look particularly at the coronary arteries. What you can have if you use this score, if you use the correct software, you can really identify each one of the coronary arteries. You get an image like this telling you the calcification amount for each artery. And finally, the software is calculating automatically the score. And as I told you, the score gives you the risk if this person have a high risk or low risk to have a problem within the coronary arteries and to have them occluded sooner or later. But there are a lot of disadvantages, of course, especially if you want to investigate cardiovascular death. You have post-mortem artifacts, as for example, the lividities I showed. You have no visualization of the vascular system, that most of the time is empty. Vessels are collapsed. You have post-mortem clots. You have a limited visualization of the organ parenchyma and of the myocardium. So it's really not so useful for this. However, you can increase the importance of the investigation if you inject a contrast agent by doing an angiography, because this is what we also do in clinics, for example. Angiography has a lot of advantages, especially it has an excellent visualization of the vascular system. You can contrast the organs and have then more information about the soft tissue. And of course, if you investigate traumatic cases, you can visualize trajectories, for example, in cases of ballistic trauma or stab wounds. However, all this information and all the advantages and limitations depend on the technique you use. There are a lot of different angiography techniques. So all the artifacts are very technique dependent. Most of the time it's the time to do the investigation, the money that you need to do the investigation, the artifacts that you should interpret correctly, and also again the problem of data storage. But the most important problem of all technique is not a technique itself, it's the one who is using it and interpreting it. So the human problem by the ones who maybe not are used to interpret this data, I think it's the most important challenge. There are, I told you, many different techniques. I cannot go into detail to explain this to you today, but just to tell you there are whole body angiography techniques versus partial angiography. Partial angiography is mostly used as targeted angiography of the coronary arteries, very used in the UK, for example, where such investigations are done in order to have angiography of coronary arteries. We have also different contrast agents, we have different injection sites, of course, and also different injection techniques. So I can tell you there are very good techniques and there are very bad techniques of angiography. As many techniques you are, as many advantages and disadvantages you have, I only can recommend use a technique that is standardized. At least you know what you are doing, and it's quite important in our job. So one of the standardized techniques and the most widespread one is the MPM-CTA, the multi-phase postmortem CT angiography that was developed in our center several years ago. This technique is called multi-phase because in order to interpret the images, you have to do 3 phases. In reality, you do 4 phases. First of all, you do a native CT scanner to document your body before you do any manipulation with it. Then we perform an arterial phase. As you can see here, we have filled the arteries, and you have indeed the aorta with the departure of the coronary artery, so the left coronary artery, and there is an image like an occlusion. It's simply remaining blood, so don't overinterpret it. If you look at the venous phase, you see that this occlusion disappears and the artery looks better filled. So the venous phase is done after injection of contrast agent also into the veins. But only in the last phase, we call it the dynamic phase, when we are doing another CT scan, while the perfusion in the body is ongoing, you can see that the coronary artery in reality is perfectly perfused. So what happened is only that the contrast agent and the remaining blood did not mix up together, and this gives you an artifact. That's why learning to read angiography data is important, and we have established the rule: a finding is only significant is it here in at least 2 phases, otherwise it should be interpreted as an artifact. So this method was tested in a big multi-center study with over 500 cases in different centers of Europe. And now we know what are the artifacts of the technique, what you can see, what you cannot see. And I think such a standardization and validation of techniques is very important if you do forensic cases with these techniques. What we learned is very interesting, because we learned that postmortem CT gives you information, postmortem angiography gives you information, and autopsy gives you information, but they don't give you the same information. If you combine these different techniques, then you have lost most of the information, you don't lose a lot, and you can increase the quality of your whole postmortem exam. None of the techniques is here to replace the other. They are here to increase the whole over outcome of your postmortem investigation. Then, of course, there are a lot of papers using this technique on cardiac tests and sudden cardiac tests. My colleague, Cathy Michaud, is working a lot on this field, and we publish a lot together in this. So, for example, postmortem imaging of sudden cardiac tests was one of the first papers in 2014, and then postmortem imaging as a complementary tool for the investigation of cardiac tests. So you can have a lot of information about this, and it was all published in our center. What you can see now concretely, of course, you can visualize coronary arteries, and the images are very easy to understand, so they are useful if you have, for example, to go to court or to talk with family members. You can unroll virtually all the coronary arteries and do a stenosis analysis, as colleagues in clinics are doing it. So we can do it also in the post-mortem cases. And of course, I can tell you that the images are very easy to explain what you have seen in the coronary arteries, for example. But you should never forget, it's one of the exams. You have to combine it. What you can see on the left side is the stenosis visible in the stenosis analysis. This information is given to the forensic pathologist before the autopsy is done. And so the pathologists can be especially careful at this place because we know already where the stenoses are. And you can really look at them at the autopsy, at macroscopic finding, and of course confirm and identify further this coronary occlusion by histology, which is always done as a standard also in our center. A lot of interesting things are outcoming from such angiographies. For example, there are a lot of information about modified coronary anatomy. This can also happen. So you have a lot of papers and also a book chapter about these different fields. And if you have modified anatomy of the coronary arteries in autopsy and you are not prepared to it, it might be quite surprising. Also, you can see dissection of coronary arteries, which maybe have overseen in an autopsy if you don't tell it before, depending on the technique you use to do the opening of the coronary arteries, of course. And also, of course, you can investigate the whole dissection, for example, of an aorta, where you can see exactly if the coronary arteries were still perfused or were they coming from the wrong lumen, and therefore no perfusion of coronary arteries was no more possible as you re-establish a circulation in the deceased person. So a lot of useful information already before the autopsy. Myocardial ischemia, can we see it? Of course, what we can see is a stenosis of a coronary artery, for example here. But if you look in the arterial phase at the myocardium, we can see what we call a pathological enhancement. You see that really the myocardium is more taking contrast, so it's enhanced. And we have learned by reading of a lot of cases that this may be in relation with a cardiac infarction or with any cardiac problems. So we started to correlate this, and we have learned, yes, this pathological enhancement is correlated to cardiac infarction. However, this does not tell you, of course, if it's an old infarction and a new one. It's just giving you more questions that you could further investigate, of course. But you already know you should especially look, for example, in one specific zone of the myocardium. If you want to have more information of the myocardium, you have to use the right imaging technique, and the best imaging technique for myocardium is the postmortem magnetic resonance imaging. It has the big advantage that it has an excellent soft tissue contrast, so you can really very well see soft tissue like the myocardium, but also organs and especially the brain parenchyma. But of course, it has a lot of disadvantages. It's a time-consuming method, it's very expensive, you have to have special equipment, you have to have access to the MRI. It's strongly dependent on the user again, and interpretation is very difficult, especially as the MRI is depending on the temperature of the investigated body. And you may have recognized that our dead ones do not have the same temperature than we have when we do the autopsy on them. So it's really very complicated to interpret this data. However, if you can do it, what you can learn is we have seen very tiny lesions in the myocardium on the MRI very, very early, so in the very early stages, even before they were visible at the macroscopic autopsy. And we are now doing a lot of investigations in order to correlate these findings with histological findings, because unfortunately this was not done so much before. And of course with immunohistochemistry in order to be better to really identify what do these findings mean. So we have hypersignals or we have hypo signals in some cases, and we want to have a good correlation. We want to know what does this signal mean, what does it mean histologically, and what does it mean if you add also immunohistological stainings for it. But here, a lot of work has still to be done, fortunately, because we have to occupy our future also in our research. Here, some more information that you can see, lesions that are clearly visible in 2 different sequences of the MRI. But until today, we have to learn what does it mean, because the information is here, but at the moment, we don't understand it correctly. So I already come to the future prospects of imaging and the sudden cardiac death investigations. I think further developments are really necessary in order to have a better diagnosis of this myocardial edema. That's what we see in the MRI. We have to differentiate what does it mean. Is it an infarction, another myocardial injury? Unfortunately, it's not written on the data. You just have these images. We have to characterize vulnerable coronary plaques. We are working at the moment on some papers on this. If there are more information about the plaques that we get already from imaging, you always say it's not so important because anyway we do histology. But these studies are especially important for clinicians because they do the studies with our data in order to be able to better interpret radiology that is done in clinics, and they cannot do the histology of their cases, so they have to learn from our cases. And I think there are many things that we still are able to learn in imaging. We also have to characterize other myocardial injuries. It's not only infarction that can kill the persons, but also other injuries that may be visible in imaging. We have to decrease artifacts due to the calcification, because they do a lot of artifacts. We have to go further with the diagnosis of another death, for example, pulmonary embolism. And we are working at the moment on a study in order to interpret it correctly, because postmortem blood clots can create some problems in this. And there are developings for developing also a combination of the 2 best methods in order to investigate the heart, meaning a protocol for biopsies and of course the imaging, but also combining, for example, the MRI with the angiography. We can also use artificial intelligence for interpreting this data in order to be even more sensitive, and also here are some projects ongoing. And finally, maybe we can develop specialized imaging methods that exist already in clinics. For example, MR-based diffusion tensor imaging or synchrotron radiation-based phase contrast CT that are very new techniques in imaging that gives images that are incredible and unbelievable to see, and maybe they are useful also for our different investigations. Just to show you, of course, I thought about future developments, but they are already ongoing. For example, here, combination of MRI with angiography. So you see the vessels and the myocardium, and this helps a lot, of course, for the interpretation of the different cases. So my take-home message today for you are the following. First of all, native CT is very good if more and more institutes are using it, but in this special kind of cases, it's very, very limited in order to do the cardiovascular investigations. In postmortem imaging, the PMCTA, so the angiography, is the method of choice for cardiovascular death and for the investigation of the system. And by combining the postmortem CT angiography and autopsy, you can really very well direct the sampling of histopathology and maybe find things that you would oversee even if you use a good protocol for the autopsy. And the postmortem magnetic resonance tomography is a very promising technique for the future, but we have to learn much more about these different techniques. So I think we will have to do new methods, new studies with it in order to be better in the future. And finally, never forget, you cannot just use clinical radiologists in order to give you the interpretation of the data. It's completely different, and they have to be trained, they have to learn. So I only can advise, go to the centers that are used to it, train the radiologists, train yourself, and so it's not necessary that everybody invents again the postmortem imaging. It's existing, and people are here to help you if you want to start. And if you want to read more about this, this is one paper that I can really recommend because it was done by a whole group of people coming from a little bit everywhere. And we really try to have a good insight and a good overview of what I have just already told you today, but in more detail, maybe at home before you go to sleep at night, and you can read more about this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Grabherr. I'm really happy to host you in Trieste. We met when I was a resident, and you were already famous many years ago. So, and thank you for your thank you to be here. Few consideration. When I started to read about application of radiology in postmortem investigation, it was the problem that postmortem radiology want to be an alternative to autopsy. I think that after some years we solved this problem. I really appreciate your presentation. We have to combine ancillary investigation, and it is very important, and thank you. And another, in your paper, I read the name of Giuseppe Guglielmi, and I was in Foggia when Giuseppe Guglielmi started to do postmortem investigation. And then our radiologists have to learn to look at postmortem radiology images. And I was looking to Lorenzo Pagnana. I know he wants to ask something, of course. So at the end of this session, there is a little space for questions. So thank you very much. And the last speaker, Professor Jakjovski from North Macedonia. Zlatko is the first of the Balkan friend, and if we are all together, is also we have to thank Zlatko. So.
Dear Stefano, dear organizers, thank you very much for this invitation and for organizing this first meeting about sudden cardiac death. We start with this activity, I can say maybe 6-8 months ago, because we find out that this problem it's everywhere in this Balkan region, and then because we miss like a unique protocol to diagnose sudden cardiac death and to prevent them. I was asked by Professor Stefano to have like academic lecture because most of the participants are students and young doctors. So my lecture will be like repetitio mater studiorum in the most of the presentation. Then in the last part, I will focus on the protocols and the problems that we are facing and what will be the solutions that we can solve all of us together. So, like the other speakers mentioned, the epidemiology of cardiovascular diseases have increased trend on the global level, but also in our country. If you saw this graphic, they are in the same way. So this means that we must face with this problem and to have a proper protocol for diagnosis, treatment, and also to prevent these cardiovascular diseases. So the conductive system of the heart starts with a physiological pacemaker, which is called sinoatrial node, and anterioventricular node, which are connected through the internodal conduction pathways, providing fast action of potential transmissions. It's located in the interatrial septum at the antericoventral node, conduct electrical impulses from the sinoatrial node to the heart ventricles. Then it's achieved via atrioventricular bundles and subendocardian conductive network of Purkinje fibrils located in the ventricle walls. The cardiac conductive system is a network of specialized cardiac muscle cells then initiate and transmit the electrical impulses responsible for the coordinate contractions of each cardiac muscles. The parts of the heart conducting system can be divided into two, that generate action potentials and those that conduct them. Other parts sequentially receive and conduct the impulse originating from the sinoatrial node and then pass to myocardial cells. Atrioventricular node is smaller than sinoatrial node and it's located in the posterior-inferior part of the interarterial septum. It's so-called Koch triangle. You can see on the picture, this is a formalin-fixed heart. What's the physiology? The entire cardiac conductive system is under the influence of autonomic pathway. Sympathetic increase the rate of sinoatrial node activity, parasympathetic decrease the rate of sinoatrial node activity. How it goes? The sinoatrial node generates the action potentials, then action potentials pass along the intra-anterior node and intra-anterior conduction pathways causing atrial systole. Then impulse arrives to the atrial ventricle node and it's slowed down to the facility ventricular filling. The impulse then passes from the atrioventricular node to the anteroventricular bundle. Then it rapidly disappears through the bundle branches and subendochondrial tissue causing ventricle systole. Sympathetic stimulation of the conductive tissue comes from the cardiac plexus, while parasympathetic influence arises from the vagus nerve. This is very important because we in forensic practice have sometimes cases when there is some stroke or beat in these plexuses, which comes to the sudden cardiac death. Activation of the sympathetic nervous system results in the release of adrenaline and other adrenergic neurotransmitters. Parasympathetic influence arises from the vagus nerve, and opposite to sympathicus, parasympathetic stimulation slows down sinoatrial node activation, thus reducing the heart rate. What can be possible disorders? Any abnormality of the conduction pathway, whether congenital or acquired, can result in a rhythm abnormality or arrhythmia. An arrhythmia simply means that the heart is not beating in the correct timing as it should. This may take in the form of the heart beating too fast, like tachycardia, or too slow, bradycardia, but also there may be abnormal sites generating the electrical impulse, so-called ectopic beats. This can be diagnosed via clinical examination and, of course, using electrocardiogram. But in our case, when we have a case for the autopsy, where we have a story that maybe it's a sudden cardiac death, it's not easy to establish a diagnosis for sudden cardiac death. Because of that, we must know the anatomical pathway of cardiac conductive system and needs to be done a gross analysis of the heart. There are several protocols. We saw in the first presentation of Professor Mary Sheppard that they have very good protocol for analyzing of conductive system of the heart. Also, we have several webinars with this international Balkan area group where here in Italy, they are having very good protocol for also analyzing of conductive system of the heart. It's not so easy. Why? Because in the most of the cases, when we work in our daily practice, when we have sudden cardiac death, the family refused the autopsy. So it's not easy to ask from them in that case to keep the heart. So it's very inconvenient to ask from them to sign the form that they will allow us to keep the heart and to proceed with the further analysis. So during the autopsy, we take the histological samples from the heart, from different places, and then we analyze them with hematoxylin eosin method. What is our daily practice? Of course, in some cases we go on the same crime investigation if we have order from the public prosecutor. But in most of the cases, those patients die in the clinic. So we are in detail analyzing medical documentation. If we have, and then we perform the whole autopsy of the body. We, of course, take histopathological samples from each organs, but especially we are focused on a heart. Like we saw on the other presentations, we can find some fibrosis, we can find some thrombosis in cardiac, in coronary arteries, we can find some myocarditis, but in most of the cases we cannot find nothing, and then we need to continue with further analysis. For each cases that we have suspicion that it's a sudden cardiac death case, we are taking blood for biochemical analysis. So we are searching enzymes for heart analysis to be done. In each case, we are doing the toxicological analysis, and of course, when we have all those analyses, we proceed with genetic analysis using NGS technology. For the NGS technology, we are working on 15 genetic polymorphisms, and like a biological material, we are taking blood. So we are not using spleen, we are using blood. What's the conclusion of this lecture? Like the other speakers mentioned, especially my colleague from Serbia, I think that we have this slide, it's almost the same. So first of all, we need local, regional, and international collaboration between the institutes. It's not means only forensic institute, but we can include here cardiology, sport medicine, and genetics. So that was one of the goals that we create this working group to call more the colleagues from these countries, and of course from the UK, which is helping us with DEMS protocol to make one better system in our region. Then to development protocol for section of cardiac conductance system. So because we don't have so many cases for sudden cardiac death, we are not so well trained to do these sections for gross cardiac examination. And of course, there should be training for the junior doctors how to do that in their daily basis. Of course, we need to make education of the population. As I told you before, in our country, most of the families refuse autopsy. So it's very important to explain to the family members that it's crucial autopsy to be done, and also genetic screening analysis to be done to the close members of the family. But also, in some cases, we don't have order from the public prosecutor, that kind of autopsy where they don't see any violence of the body to be sent to the forensic autopsy. So, of course, we need to do some seminars or workshops with them also to explain them the importance that these cases should go on autopsy. Of course, there are problems with funding, like everywhere in the world, but we can, on that way, have the real statistic concerning the sudden cardiac death, but also we can make better prevention methods. Also, we don't have a national register for sudden cardiac deaths in North Macedonia, so we need to do that for this next year. Of course, you have present to us your national register, so it will be very helpful for us to lead us through that process. And of course, we need to do population genetic studies, because in our institute we don't have such a big number of cases that we analyze, so we need to start and look for funds for those population genetic studies, because all of you know that this is very expensive. So if we start to build this project, all of us, I think that we can find a budget for population studies, not only in North Macedonia, but in all region, and of course to compare them and to have more information about which kind of polymorphisms are the most present in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Zlatko, for your presentation. If there is some questions for speakers, or we go on to have a lunch pause later.